Dennis always has me come in here and finish his work. I don't know what it is.
Hey, welcome back to the studio. Is it proper to call you show regular at
Sounds
this
good
point?
to me.
Right? Sounds good, right?
Good
Sounds
to be
good to
here.
me too. So, we are rolling with episode 51 here, the Connected by Water podcast, presented by Joey Accardi, Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, Ram. And as always, we are honored to have Florida House Representative Chip LaMarca with us to pay us a visit, say hello, hang out, and talk about clean water like we always like to do, among many other things. I wanted to launch this today by saying you cannot get away from a COVID conversation right now, even if you tried, right? So,
Right.
But we're going to try as much as possible. We can talk about it. Obviously, you have to deal with it with what you do. But I just think that there's so much. It's so flooded that it's like just white noise at this point. And like, who do you believe? Who do you not believe? And, tests come up and then new reports come out that, all the testing is false and people are getting double tested and all the reports are. The one just came out, the Orlando Health came out this morning saying all these things were wrong with the testing and the numbers might be false, but hospitalizations are up a little bit, so they're not all wrong. So it's tough to whatever.
Yep.
But anyway, I'm just gonna say my piece about it, get it out of the way. And then just say we're gonna try not to go there today. If at
I'll
all
give you one
possible,
thing,
but if you want to go there, we can go through it right now.
No, my tie to the, I think to what you do, and I always think it's funny when I come out here, I have to drive directly away from the water to get connected by water.
Right.
Got
Well, we got a river of grass right behind us here.
That's
So
true. So my connection really, and so what I love to do is work with businesses and work with things that affect the economy and people's lives. And one of the things that was very frustrating during, kind of coming out of the initial and then shutdowns and who we're going to shut, what's essential, what's a non-essential business. We had this thing where Broward County, and I'd spent 8 years there, but was really not understanding that fuel docks needed to be open if you want to get people out on the water and keep them away from other people and get them on their boat with their family, and whether it's fishing or just going out on the water. And there was this constant fighting back and forth, or whether fuel docks were essential, because there was not an understanding at the county level, to be honest with you, that there were boats behind people's houses, that boats didn't just go in the water by ramp, because they shut the ramps down. They said, well, why does anybody need to get fuel in their boat? They can just go to the gas station and fill up a 5-gallon fuel jug. And I said, well, a lot of these boats have 100, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1,000-gallon fuel tanks, and they're out in the water. And I said, what we're going to have is somebody's going to get in a car accident because they're going to have 25-gallon, jugs in the back of a pickup truck, and there's going to be a terrible, terrible accident. So we finally got it worked out. So Lighthouse Point and Taha and Deerfield, the Cove, and those. So now people are out in the water. I think that's a safe place for them to be.
no, 100%. I mean, I can't think of a better activity to do right now than that. And I think a perfect example of that too is boat sales are way up.
Yeah,
I mean, they're better than they've ever been. Yeah, the boat sales are better than they've ever been ever. I mean, I'm even like, looking at it right now too, like, hey, we're going to get a boat here in the next month or so, because there's like all these family vacations that are not being had.
A lot of
all
RV
this
sales
money
too.
that's a lot of RV sales, and so people are like, hey, instead of like not having that summer vacation, let's buy a boat and make our own summer vacation, which I think is a perfectly viable solution to that. So if you're in the market for a boat, you might want to wait a couple of years. I think the used boat market's going to be flooded with all these sales, but
don't let that keep you from getting on the water now.
Don't let it keep you from getting on the water. I mean, my father-in-law is, I say this on the show a lot, but he's a scout and Carolina skiff dealer up in New Jersey. And for the first time ever, he's midway through season up there in New Jersey, because they have season up there. Right. Here, boat sales are all year long, but up in New Jersey, they got to winterize their stuff. He's out of stock right now. And so he's basically just trying to fulfill 2021 boats now. Wow. Yeah, so.
Good problem to have.
Good problem to have. Yeah, for sure. So I guess that's the upside of some of this stuff, right? Right. Certain our business here has elevated, with having the boat sales are up, then the things we do for boaters, the artwork and the apparel and all the things, that's going to be an effect of that too. So, yeah. So it's really good that all the work that you did though with the boat ramps or with the gas fuel docks and everything like that.
Just made common sense, right?
Yeah, for
How
sure.
can you have a boat without fuel?
Absolutely. All right, I'm not going to go down too far down the COVID road, but it's do you want to elaborate a little bit at all on the recent numbers and the truth behind them? Do you have different insight than most people do on that? I mean,
no, so this whole issue and this is a worldwide crisis,
right?
And people have some people have gotten it and politicized it, having it, and taken to social media to talk about it every day. I mean, maybe that's okay for the average person to hear an average person who has COVID-19 and is going through that. And that's a learning, it's a life lesson, why I don't want to get this. But there's just been so much, whether it's national or local media who's hyped and politicized this, whether or not you should wear a mask. I mean, it's common sense. Put something over your if it's going to come through your nasal passages and your mouth, put something over it. Put a neck gaiter on when you go out, or put a face mask on. And I mean, outside of that, we've got to protect. The biggest thing is we have to protect those who are vulnerable, our seniors, those with respiratory and other comorbidities and other pre-existing conditions. And outside of that, we can't shut down the 14th or 15th largest economy in the world, and that's what we basically did just in Florida.
Yeah, and I don't think we should be shutting down. That's for sure. I mean,
we can take precautions, and absolutely, but this idea that everyone's scared, so we don't want to go back to whether it's school or whether it's the the office. There are, just like your business is up, there are ways to kind of COVID-proof your business. If it's a law firm or it's a accounting office, you still have to go and do things. So people have gone to different cycles. They've kind of remapped the office, split sessions, that type of thing. So, I mean, that's all. I mean, I kind of spent a lot of time since March 19th dealing with whether it's unemployment or getting information out about the pandemic. And I think people are starting to pay attention, and, hopefully the numbers will subside. And I think they're more a function of much, much, much more testing.
Yeah.
You're going to get positive numbers. What I look at are the people in the hospital that have critical issues, and then the deaths.
Right.
And I think a few days ago it was the number was 43 out of millions and millions of cases of positive.
And Broward had 0 yesterday.
Did it? Okay.
Yeah. Just so people know, we usually roll this out on a Friday and record it on a Tuesday. So that's going to be a delayed number when people actually see the podcast. But this is, as far as last Monday went, yeah.
Well, yeah. But to your point, there's a lot of other things going on, and we've got to kind of keep our mind on other things, not just that, because we'll all go kind of crazy. So
so thanks for ramping us off of that one like that, because that's very true, and that's the whole point of me actually bringing it up in the first place. Like, although it's easy to just make an entire episode about that, there are some things going on in our state that are really important, that are very cool, that our governor has implemented, that you have worked with him on. Just a variety of different things. There's some programs that you're working on independently as well, that we'd love to talk about.
Sure.
But the first thing I want to talk about is we recently signed that bill for the NCAA players to become compensated and their likenesses to be licensed, right? So can you take me through a little bit of how that worked out and how hard you guys pushed to get more for the athletes at the end of the day?
Sure. So the bill was a bill that came out of our office. Ultimately, the way things kind of work in the Florida House, because that's where I serve, leadership kind of took made the decision that we were gonna hear it. It would be effectively going through judiciary, because it's changed in state law based on universities and colleges and athletics. It would go through education, because it was going through the education system, upper ed. And it would go through commerce, because it was a fiscal impact. People were going to be able to make money off of something they weren't before. So those are kind of the committees where it went. And what was interesting was before session started, we had been working this since September, October. And we watched California get theirs out. We knew that we could do better. We knew California. One of the biggest things is they said we're going to make it effective January 1, 2023. And
so ours is going to be effective before theirs, right?
So
Ours
ours
we're going to be the first one
in the country. So we were supposed to be July 1 of this year, like 13 days ago. Thankfully, with what's all going on in the world, the Senate had the wherewithal to say, all right, well, we want to do this, and the only way a bill gets to the governor is that the Senate and the House move it forward, and then one of those bills gets taken up, the House or the Senate version. And the Senate ended up, the only real change throughout this whole process was they delayed it a year. So July 1 of 2021. So that gives universities and colleges, and I'll backtrack on how we got here, but our athletic directors, just like whether it's Brian White at FAU or Blake James at Miami, they're starting to, and also up at Coburn and his team up at Florida State, they're really looking at this saying, all right, how do we get ready for this? Now they have a year to get ready, and there's going to be some education for them as well. In other words, the mechanics of the bill are this. Any student athlete, and it's not just NCAA, so there's NAIA, where Kaiser University is a member, St. Thomas and other schools are NAIA, and then there's NCAA. And ultimately, both were on the same track of saying a student athlete, no matter what sport they were in, or what gender they were, they could not benefit off their name, image, or likeness. So Donald Delahaye up in Central Florida at UCF couldn't do videos about him kicking a football. Even though he's a backup kicker, he wasn't going to make a ton of money off of these videos. They banned him from doing it, and then they kind of went back and forth. And that was one case. The other one was at FSU. There was a female soccer player, Dana Castellanos, who is now playing professional, and she had 1.5 million. At the time, it was 1.3. She grew by 200,000 Instagram followers while we were doing this bill. So she's at 1.5 million Instagram followers. She could have easily done advertisements or endorsements for any product. It could have been for a boat, it could be a water skiing. It could have been soccer apparel. It could have been sunglasses. It could have been anything. The local car dealer or the local restaurant. But they were banned from that. And one doesn't have anything to do with the other. And here's how I looked at it. You've got, obviously big names like Michael Dell and Bill Gates and Zuckerberg. They did their, they built their programs, they built their companies coming out of a dorm room, and they weren't banned from doing it. If you're sitting in your dorm room, you figure out a better fishing app, how to, maybe pin where you were last time the dolphin were biting, and, you create this app and it ends up 1 million people download it for $1. You've got $1 million minus whatever your costs are. You did that in your dorm room, and you're an economics student or a biology student. The athlete sitting next to the engineering student that creates an app couldn't do that. So to us, it really was an equity towards student athletes. Everybody thinks student athletes are going to have these huge contracts. They're all going to be successful. 98% of football, for example, don't go on to play professionally. There's women's softball. There is no professional. There's some intramural and some amateur after that, or maybe a few bucks here or there to be made. Maybe some volleyball, but there are a lot of sports that there just isn't something after college, and that's where their fame and fortune opportunities are kind of there. They're just not going to get professional if it exists. So we saw this as a free market issue that, why are these kids being discriminated against instead of them being all, mega rich athletes and all that, because that's just such a small number. It was really more of an equity. So we got the bill moving. What we had was really interesting in the beginning of session. So the day before we actually kicked off the 2020 session, we had a 3-way committee in one of the office buildings there, a big kind of a meeting room. And they said the last time that this room was so packed with such a big committee was during the 2000 recount. So we kind of go back to
the hanging chads.
Yeah, that's where they were doing it. So here we were.
Wow, it's a flashback.
Yeah, it was Judiciary, Education, and Commerce. So 20 people on each committee. We had 60 members asking questions to basically experts in the field. There was a compliance lawyer from Tulane. There was a gentleman from the Aspen Institute. And then somebody we became friendly with who helped the California bill move along, a gentleman by the name of Ramogi Huma, who was with an organization called the National Collegiate Players Association. And he was a former UCLA football player that saw these inequities to athletes, specifically in football, where, I'll give you a great example. We passed the bill and the pandemic happens. pandemic happens, if you and I are going to school and we've got a friend who's a football player, for example, on scholarship, we go home to our houses. Maybe they don't. Maybe they're not going back to all the way home, or they don't have the dollars for it. But they're not allowed on campus, and we were seeing 19 to 20% homelessness among college students in the United States.
What?
So if they have no place to go, think about it this way. Now you think of homelessness,
That is crazy.
They could come stay on your couch. But if your dad's a booster at the University of Miami, now it's a benefit. It's a benefit to that athlete. So they're under a different set of circumstances, and I think what we did in Florida more than anything, give them the opportunity to make a few bucks, but really created more of an equitable system that that some of these things aren't against the law anymore.
I mean, it's $1 billion industry, right? The NCAA.
It's
a monster, and they're they have free employees.
We specifically didn't go after them, in a manner that, hey, we're taking on the NCAA. That wasn't our goal.
Right.
That wasn't anything that I was interested in doing, but I was looking out for the students, and
it's fair opportunity.
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
but to your point, I mean, they don't have to pay for their employees, right? They're out playing a sport, and all they have to do is show up with the TV contracts,
right?
And the other things. So
that's the argument for it. It's like and then the argument against it for a lot of people was, well, they're getting a free education, which I think that was a bunch of BS, to be honest with you, because a lot of these, let's face it, a lot of these students, they had adjunct professors. They weren't really required to go to class. A lot of them were just they just show up, we'll give you an A, and like all these stuff like that. But this bill is kind of designed to combat that, isn't it? Not
just showing up and getting a grade, but there were cases that we found, for example, under a previous coach at USF, a student was strongly advised, if they wanted to start, against going to school for engineering. Do something easier.
Right.
Do something that didn't put you in labs 3 days a week. We need you on the field. So they're getting that education. We call it a free people say a free education, but they've paid into the system for years building up to this. Whether it was we're out fishing, the football or baseball players, in the gym training, or summer camp, whatever it might be. So they've already banked into that, and then here they are at the university. They're not out with the same schedule that you and I would be. So a lot of that is, we can say it's a free education if they get it and if they go to school for what they want to do and something that's useful.
Now, I can't say that about all the student athletes, because there are some, the first one that comes to my mind is Christian Ponder, for the previous quarterback at Florida State University, where he graduated early and then started moving on to work getting his master's. And there's other stories like that.
Gino Truett, I think, at an MBA when he was at Miami, and
And there's a lot of stories like that where they do kind of take that under the wing and say, no, I'm actually going to use this opportunity. My parents are making me use this opportunity to actually get the education, and I'm going to move forward like that.
Myron Roll at Florida State is probably the best example of that. I mean, Rhodes Scholar,
exactly,
and all that. But here's how you flip the whole conversation on its head. His ability to be a great athlete was hindered by his studies. So he played professionally. I want to say either the Ravens or Titans. I think the Ravens, but he only played for a few years. I mean, he could have played longer, but he wanted to go to medical school. So I mean, here's a guy who achieved in two worlds, sports and medicine and education. So you give up a lot for either one.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a great thing that you guys did with this. And I fully supported it right from the beginning when we first talked about it on the show when you were on here last time. It was kind of in its,
early stages.
Early stages and getting the ball rolling, but moving forward at that time, and now we're officially past it. So at this point, what's the separation between what the state did with passing the law and what the NCAA has to do, or what their role is in this? Like, what's the separation between church and state, so to speak?
Okay, so the NCAA and the reason this thing got to where it did and then got signed was that we had a starter from the Yale baseball team as governor. We knew that we had conversations with him. We knew what he was willing to look at and what he wasn't, and he was very much in favor of this legislation. Now, where does this fall for Florida California. There's 22 states that are considering this legislation. We're just the second to have passed it. But
Well, once they see Florida getting all the national championships coming in,
what's
all
ironic
the great
is-
recruiting,
so
they're going to have
UM
to get on board, right?
There was an article the other day that UM is already using, the idea that, hey, if you come to the state of Florida, we have this bill that's been passed.
Sure.
So to your point, the NCAA could very well sue California. What they did is they actually
The NCAA could sue California?
Yeah, they could take up a lawsuit with California. But what they did is they took aim at the NCAA. California did. We didn't mention them one time in our bill. We just said that universities and colleges in the state of Florida are heavily subsidized by the Florida legislature, by the state of Florida, and by that we have some say in what they do and don't do. And we passed this law, and this is an agreement between the state of Florida because we're a big donor to their universities and colleges. And in doing that, this is something that they'll have to accommodate. And they're all, we talked to the vast majority of the universities in the state of Florida, and most were apprehensive when they met with myself and with Corey, my legislative aide, who'd worked on this with me from the beginning. But in every case, when we finished our conversation, they were understanding that it wasn't my goal to go fight with the NCAA or do something that they couldn't do, and they all understood it better. So the process is that us not naming and not having any commerce clause issues with the NCAA.
Right, like the NCAA must mandate that X, Y, and Z. Yeah, okay.
So we're not telling them what to do, and they certainly can't come in and tell us what to do with this. Now, where it causes an issue and where it begs for a 50-state solution, Senator Rubio and some other ones have been talking about this, but where it begs a national solution, think about it. Florida State gets recruits based on the fact that they could benefit off their name, image, and likeness, and maybe Duke or North Carolina State, any of those ACC teams. Same thing with Miami's ACC, and so that Florida is a good example, and the SEC. All of the other southern states that have Southeastern Conference teams don't have this benefit, so it might be a slightly unfair benefit towards Florida. But we think these other states are going to be coming on board, and the NCAA will do something, whether it's to solve the issue and just say it's legal, then our bill is kind of moot. Or if the federal government, like I said, if someone in the House and the Senate come together, put a bill together, gets signed, it becomes a national law, then ultimately ours is probably preempted as well.
Are you allowed to comment or say, or do you even have any knowledge whatsoever as to how the NCAA feels about this?
We've never had a conversation with them. We haven't tried to, and we just figured we would work within our confines of Florida. We have worked with some folks that used to have pretty high-ranking positions at the NCAA, and they're all in favor of this. They kind of know it's coming. The NCAA put a work group together last year, I want to say January, and basically said, all right, well, we're going to commit to doing this, but as typical, again, not to pick on them, but when they finally came up with something, it wasn't quite there. You know what I mean? It was it eliminated a lot of the things that would basically make this completely free market. They basically just said we still want to have basic control. Okay. They let them tinker with a little bit, video games, that type of thing. But actually they wouldn't let them do team benefits, and that's really that EA Sports game where that all went away because of this.
Was it you, John? Was it you that was telling me that there was one particular athlete that was in a video game that? No. Someone was telling me that the other day. That there was like this one particular college athlete that was obviously being featured in the game, and he got upset about it, and there was a lawsuit about it. I don't think.
So I can tell you there wasn't a lawsuit in this case, but I can tell you the quarterback at USF was all of the players were there. Tebow, you could kind of see, he would do the kneel in the end zone, and this quarterback Matt Grothe from USF was clear that it was him. But to make it even, but he didn't make any money off of it, just like any other athletes. But a few years later, when season ticket holders purchased their USF tickets, they sent a Matt Grothe bobblehead. Corey has one in the office. So they made a bobblehead of a human being who's now working in the
a sculpture, if you will.
Yeah, exactly, with a bobbling head. And he didn't make any money off it, but people were actually buying this, and so someone was making money off it. It just wasn't him.
Wow.
He had joined the the
That's the
economy as
thing,
an
I mean-
adult and left sports, it was done.
At the end of the day, I always look at it this way. At the end of the day, we're all human. It's a people-to-people thing,
Yep.
right? I mean, whether
Yep.
you're a kid or a student or this whole rule blocking, you're still making money off somebody else. I mean, that's the bottom line. Is the way I kind of see it. So, what's this 1 year, 3 year thing you were telling me about too?
So probably the most critical issue among this is not just allowing folks to make a few bucks off their name, image, or likeness, but also knowing what to do with it, being properly educated and trained on the financial literacy piece, what the impacts of high and low credit, low interest on credit cards, what the impact of high balance on credit cards, savings accounts, checking accounts, basically financial
skills,
literacy.
right?
And then the other piece is more life skills of not just the financial piece, but now that you have somebody representing you, an agent or representative of some sort, what's the relationship? How does the relationship need to be? How do you keep yourself in control of this? And basically just good business practices.
That's outstanding.
Yeah, we didn't want to send anybody into a situation where they make some money and because of poor choices and not being properly trained, or they may not have had this up to that point, they could be in a worse situation than they had before. I mean, a good example that comes to mind is maybe Bernie Kosar.
Right.
Yeah, he gets drafted and gets all this money, but thanks to his generosity to his family, he ended up with a lot of debt and other things early on. But you think of some of those things and you want to say, well, if I had done this different, or if I didn't do that business deal spur of the moment, to build a restaurant with 5 other people and I'm the one paying the bills, kind of thing. So,
I think that's a very interesting component to this whole thing, because you can imagine. I don't mean to cut you off, but you can imagine, coming from no money to all of a sudden have floods of money. I mean, money's a responsibility, and it's a skill to manage that responsibility. It really is, and you see it so many times where these kids coming from college and professional sports and poor, then rich, then poor again, real quick, and they get taken advantage of, and people come out of the woodworks for money.
It's a benefit, and to any benefit, or I would say, I always tell people, with liberties come responsibilities, and with money, with money or a benefit like that, come responsibilities. You're expected to take care of your own family, and you're expected to be able to grow it, and ultimately you want to do the best for everyone at the same time. Those decisions are tough.
Yeah, I think
saying
that's
no
great.
is a hard thing.
I think that's great that whole 1 year, 3 year thing is included. That's for sure. So kudos to you for getting that done and putting that through. And the governor, right? He had a little hand in it too, right?
Yep. Our Senate sponsor was from the Melbourne area, and then we signed the bill last June 12th at UM.
Awesome. At UM. My friend Brett Romberg will be happy to hear that.
We had Jonathan Vilma and Corey Simon were there. So
there's
a Noel and a Kane there
very
to
cool.
sign it. So
yeah, awesome. Awesome. Good for you. So I'm going to move this along to speak a little bit about one of my favorite topics.
Water.
Which is water, and particularly the Everglades. We just had the governor sign a $322 million budget, or a $1 billion budget that had $322 million set aside for the Everglades. And
so,
among other things.
The big piece is water and environment to the governor was $625 million. And it was the same as last year. It was a commitment he made to spend $2.5 billion over the 4 years he's in office. But to your point, the Everglades were about $320 million of that.
Yeah, which is outstanding. And some of that has to do with the natural springs, and some of it has to do with fighting algae blooms and red tide.
The overall 625, would go towards blue-green algae, red tide, studying our environment so that we can prevent some of these things. And then the bulk of it, or half of it, last year and this year will go to the Everglades. So over the course of the 4 years he's in office, he'll have, if we get the budget done every year like this, it'll be $1.2 billion towards Everglades restoration, which obviously our federal partners are a big part of that. But we've got, to that point, we've got other issues as well. And, we've still got septic tanks in some places, and we've got other issues spilling into the environment. So,
well, you had the Lauderdale by the Sea scenario. Is it still kind of in play? I mean, what's going on with that?
So there are successes and failures every year. The success of this is we got our the state commitment of $250,000 approved and then it was in see these 4 pages of those are all vetoes.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So even though the governor did $625 million, this was all of the local water projects, from whether it was, for example, Key Biscayne, Sargassum removal, Whitewater Springs, water treatment distribution. So every member typically came in with a project, and mine was to get those last few septic tanks out of Lauderdale by the Sea in the Palm Club. And they're moving forward with the project. The county and the city, when I was there, we struck a contribution deal, and the town is doing their deal. I'll probably be back with that next year, but the reason I say that the governor had some cuts to me, he took $1 billion out of the budget in vetoes. What he didn't take out, and I don't want to get you too far off topic, but was
it's all the topic.
The big raise for our school teachers in Florida, which was $500 million plus to get starting or any base teacher up to 47.5. And then another $100 million for teacher advancement for veteran teachers.
Right. So that's why I think it's important to bring that up, though.
Yeah,
if you're
kind of
people are
weighing those
wondering
things,
why,
right?
if people are wondering why, it didn't get pushed that way for water. It's like, well, some things need more addressing as well.
So
it's a balance.
in the 625. To your point, is Everglades was 325. Something that it probably I'm not going to. You're not going to ever see me walking around patting myself in the back. But one of the things I think is worthy of mentioning is when I was on the county commission rebuilding segment 2, so from Hillsborough Inlet to Port Everglades was important. So that's Pompano, Lauderdale by the Sea, and Fort Lauderdale. Well, the only way we can get these beach projects done is if we can rank them statewide and figure out where the dollar is going to go. And we created a bill last year that passed unanimously called Coastal Management, and it not only does it give us the ranking for environmental aspects as well as shore protection, but also economic impact. What does a beach mean to our local economy? How does it protect the uplands and all those things? But what good is a position in line to do a project without the money? So this year we finally got in. It was 30 up to this point, but we finally got $50 million recurring. So from this point forward, every year there'll be $50 million statewide to put into beach projects. And why that's important is we use that locally to leverage the federal dollars, and then we put in some local dollars. So typically it's 50%. If it's reimbursable by the feds, it's a 50% federal, 25% state, 25% local city and county kind of match. So the way these projects can move forward, now we have a recurring funding stream. So that was something that was really important on the environmental side, and the governor understood that, and we don't right now we're suffering because we don't have our tourism industry, but that's really where people come to Florida, whether it's to fish or sit on the beach or get out on the water. Ultimately our coastal areas are really sought after, and people want to come here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's fantastic work that you've done on that one. I mean, really, that beach project
important.
was phenomenal. Yeah, definitely. So after this whole budget was passed, then the Clean Waterways Act comes into play, and that includes bigger fines for dumping pollutants into the waterways and new rules for septic tanks and agricultural runoff, which there's no easy way to segue into talking about our beloved Fort Lauderdale and the issues that we've been having lately. I know a good friend of the studio and just personal friend, Jeff Maggio, who also has a podcast, Lunker Dog, Run That Dog podcast, just went out the other day with the mayor of Fort Lauderdale, and they did a kind of a runaround. And it seems like the mayor's coming around to doing a lot of good positive work. Or what's your take on how Fort Lauderdale is responding to their recent sewer problems and all the things that have been going on there?
Yeah. So the irony is that sewer leak in Fort Lauderdale, every one of those, from George English Park, Bayview, Rio Vista, all of those, Victoria Park, all of those breaks were in my district.
Oh,
every
really?
single one of them. Yeah. And it's heartbreaking. Part of the real honest conversation we need to have is there are members in that current city commission, at least 2, who were there under the previous administration when they made these decisions. So let's wind this back and let's take the politics out of it and just say it's about responsibility,
right?
Stewardship. It's our environment. the city manager's been doing an excellent job. I'm a fan of the way he tries to get people to yes, let's try to accomplish something rather than telling everybody no. And this is one of those issues that he took the time out of his busy schedule here in Fort Lauderdale. The city manager did, and with their representative came up to Tallahassee. We sat with the governor's chief of staff and the deputy that is over the environmental DEP area. And what was important was that we tried to figure out a way. Nobody wanted to have a sewer line break, right? But
Right.
the fact is that it was identified where that break happened, that was going to happen sometime soon. It was
forecasted,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Well, in there. So ultimately, when they finally dug up the pipe, I mean, it was. I forget the specific dimensions, but if it was an inch thick or 3/4 of an inch thick at the top, it was paper thin at the bottom. There's a seam basically down the bottom of the pipe that's not a seam. That's basically where it blew apart. And at every however long I want to say 25 to 30 feet, these sections of ductile iron pipe, as they rust and corrode, there's a ring at the end of bell. Mm-hmm. So it stops it from going to the next one. But they were all kind of in that same condition. That line goes from basically the center of the Coral Ridge Country Club golf course. There's a lift station there, and it goes all the way basically down to Port Everglades, the water facility down at Port Everglades. So all along there is kind of where it broke. The positive part is that they're now replacing it and leaving the old line in place. Going to clean it out, probably line it and have it as a backup. That way, if God forbid something ever happens again in this part here, they can isolate, before and after the break and go back to the other pipe and repair it without having all this raw sewage. But the clean water issue that you'd mentioned, that higher penalties and fines. The city ended up with a $2.1 million fine. Mm-hmm. Keeping in mind the total runoff into our waterways was 21 million or so, 20.6 million gallons of raw sewage. Wow. Some of it went into people's houses.
Insane.
So it was crazy.
It was bad.
It was a bad situation.
It runs out to the beach and the swimming and everything.
And typically, so the positive side of that, and again, I said the city manager came up to Tallahassee. The positive side of that is that what we try to do is, instead of having the city, therefore the taxpayers, ultimately the city's not in a business. It takes in taxes and it appropriates them. We didn't want to have all these taxpayer dollars just basically go to the state for a fine. Well, obviously,
I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to ask that. I'm like, well, okay, it's good for the city to get fined 2.1, but who ultimately really is paying the bill for that? Yeah.
So they ultimately they can reinvest that after this conversation with the governor's office, which he's been excellent at working in this process through. Or they've listened. They just haven't told them, hey, you did this we feel you did this on purpose. We're going to penalize you. You have to pay this fine. Ultimately, they have to put these dollars, if they can, and they're working on that right now, is put these into an environmental project that will directly have a positive effect on water and the environment there in Fort Lauderdale. So they're working on that now. I know they're redoing a significant portion of that water plant down at Port Everglades, as well as the 5-ash. I mean, they have a multiple year plan, a long-term capital plan to replace a great portion of their water and wastewater facilities.
So this is more of a replace situation than a repair situation, I would assume.
Oh yeah,
right?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So they're putting a new main sewer line in between that area I just mentioned from Coral Ridge all the way down to the port, and they're doing like Bayview Drive right now. If you drive down Bayview, you would see, half from a couple blocks at a time are cut off and basically barricaded. So they're replacing that line. Then they'll move the construction side. It's kind of almost like renourishing the beach. They'll do, this quarter mile, these couple of blocks here. Then they'll move the site down another couple of blocks and knock it out. So they're working at it hard, but it was a tough lesson for them to learn, I think.
Yeah, tough lesson, and also now it's a major undertaking. And it's not the most exciting thing necessarily for people to kind of get into, but it's like if people really understand the significance of it, Well,
and that's I think why not just look, we're in one of the biggest bull markets and hospitality economies of our time. Excuse me. And the city of Fort Lauderdale, for example, there's no other way to say this. I mean, the past and current leadership are good people, but I mean, they deferred maintenance on a lot of these lines. And in doing that, I mean, because I'm not going to say it's because it's not sexy, but at the end of the day, ripping up underground and replacing infrastructure, it's not only unsexy, if you will. It's not a new building or a new park, something that people get to use, but it's also very disturbing to the community around it. You know, trying to get through normal life, ripping up driveways and roads and all that. They had already replaced the west. There's three. If you think of Fort Lauderdale, there's a western main sewer line. There's a central, and then there's the beach. The beach would be next. The western portion was already done a few years ago, and you know, to your point, it's not a sexy project. People have to do it. They pushed it off, and you know, these are the things you can find out when you don't, you don't follow that maintenance plan or that long-term plan.
Yeah, I mean, I know, you know, for those that maybe listen to this program that are not of the South Florida area, you know, Fort Lauderdale and its waterways and its Venice of the United States kind of theory is it's a convoluted area with a lot of pipes and a lot of, so it's not a small project. Pompano in itself is maybe like that, but on a slightly smaller scale. And I think that's one of the things that they did correctly before they had their recent sprawl situation, their expansion situations. They addressed the sewer before they did their build out. You know, and which I think was and we had Mayor Rex on here and Horatio from the CRA on here, and Horatio really kind of took us through the whole thing of everything that the city did sewer wise before they did their expansion.
You know, when they put I'll give you a sewer is a perfect example, but I'll give you another one that we always think about when you're redeveloping an area, parking. You know, chicken or egg, if you will. And I remember being at the groundbreaking of the parking garage at the pier when none of the other work was done yet. The little old library was still there.
Right.
The surface lot was still there. None of the new restaurants were built yet. They built this pier parking garage, and it was time we got done with it. It was like $19 million with the sails on it, the turtle friendly lighting, and the retail space. And now guess what? They have Oceanic and Boathouse, and there's a new one coming up. Forget what it's.
What the the one that's
Lucky Fish.
Yeah, Lucky Fish. That's
Lucky
it.
Fish, and then there's those other retail establishments. There's Kilwins. I think there's a Burger Fi.
Alvin's
So
Island
all
and
of
all
those
that,
places are coming in, and there's parking. So it's tough sometimes to make the decision and look to the voters and say, I put up a $19 million parking garage because we're going to need it.
Right.
And now we need it. So
it was great foresight, and I think I have to really kind of I have to give a shout out to Horatio Danovich he does great work with the city.
He's
really
the nuts and bolts to keep that whole thing moving. He really is smart guy.
I can speak from personal experience because I work with him a lot with the stuff that we do in the city, and he tells me a lot of. He's like, we have to think about this, Dennis. We have to think about that because in a couple of years it's going to be like this, and we have to forecast for that. He does a really good job, and I have to really kind of take my hat off.
Quite a bit going on down that way, and then now that other southwest parcel there where Ivan J. Smith building and so that's identified as a redevelopment parcel, and the restaurant on the Intercoastal to the west of there on the south side of Atlantic. So there's a lot going on down there.
Yeah, they're going to be addressing Dixie Highway as well. So
yep,
and that's fantastic to see. Other towns I think need to kind of take heed of both that positive story and the negative story with the Fort Lauderdale. And when I say other towns, I mean like Fort Myers and Sarasotas and Tampas and places like that around town, and maybe even some of the smaller towns like the Melbournes that maybe don't have the budgets that like a Fort Lauderdale does. Use this as a learning lessons or a platform, please, because you're going to have these problems as well, because we've discussed it on the show before where Florida's fairly still a new frontier of the United States, and a lot of the infrastructure that was built, although forecasted a sprawl, probably didn't forecast this kind of sprawl.
Well, Fort Lauderdale was at 1911, I think. The county was 15. I think Pompano was 09. But this around 1911, those pipes, some of those pipes, obviously they're 100 years old, but most of them are at least 50, 60, and they have a 30 to 40 year lifespan.
Wow.
So, new products coming out, they can be helpful there. But to your point, I think, whether it's a CRA or redevelopment area, it's not always easy to say, well, here's what I want it to be in 10 years or 20 years. That's a long time.
Yeah.
But you have to start at some point. And, we kind of saw what Delray did. when they started, 5 years later they had a major impact. And you same thing in Pompano. 5 to 7 years later, you have major impact of whether it's Atlantic Boulevard corridor and the pier or Dixie in the Western corridor. So there's quite a bit going on.
Yeah, for sure. So it's good to see that the state at the state level, they're getting involved with regulating this and holding cities accountable, and not only just holding them accountable, but becoming involved. And I think that's good to see, because that's really kind of what needs to happen. I mean, because who's to say, one sewer pipe busts, maybe nothing happens. So in a way, maybe at the end of the day, this might be,
there's some places
positive thing that comes out of
West
this.
Coast. I won't name the city, but it was in the paper quite a bit that they were purposely offload, basically, pumping off, some wastewater. It may have been relatively clean, but still pumping it into a body of water. I mean, we have to be very cognizant of not just the issues of blue-green algae or other things that would cause us a tough situation for our environment, but also the thousands of species that are living under that water. So
right, yep. Well, it's going to be interesting to see too as more rains come, how that affects the middle of the state.
Yep.
And all the things that the state has done to either rebudget or reappropriate some of the things that happen there, which I think they've made good steps. In that.
The governor's been very positive on environmental issues as a whole, but just not only that, but we start thinking about other things that might come to our frontier, and whether that's offshore or inland fracking or any of that type of stuff. And he's been
right there. You go. So there's been some offshore drilling proposals. Where are we?
There was an article. It was interesting. There was an article maybe 10, 14 days ago that said it specifically didn't mention the president or the governor, but it said the administration and through Interior, the Department of Interior, had been having that conversation. So immediately the political, comments start coming out about whether it's the president or the governor. And what was crazy to me, because I've been involved in this for a while, I've been in Florida since I was 3 and grew up on that beach in Fort Lauderdale and Pompano and Lauderdale by the Sea. And, I don't want to, drag this into the political stuff, but the person that's running against me did a social media poll. What do you think about this? And I'm thinking to myself, well, we all know what we think about it. If you care about this state and you care about this community, the answer is absolutely never, not now, not here, not ever. So the answer is very simply no. I mean, I voted against fracking in the Everglades, and it wasn't that they were going to put up immediately a oil well or natural gas drilling operation to frack in the Everglades, but it was a real estate company called Cantor.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and so they were going to do some test wells and some test fracking. Well, we know where that's going to go, and I'm very much a supporter of a multitude of different energies. I'm not someone that says, hey, we've got to get off of fossil fuels immediately or different things. There's a right answer for the right situation, but I definitely didn't want to have that in the Everglades. And this idea of any type of offshore drilling. Now, some of this might be out of our hands if the Bahamas decide to do something, or Cuba or anywhere else that's within.
They're going to bring the Chinese in.
Our old and new friends, but from a standpoint of what's important is that's something that just I don't see in my mind. I can't, from an environmental standpoint, could never see happening.
I don't think anybody's really for that. If anyone's really for that, it's probably about maybe like
somebody who lives in Oklahoma.
Yeah, right. Someone's that's not a Floridian and has a ton of money and just wants to exploit every resource they possibly can.
Right.
But I don't think any Floridian really wanted that. I mean, I remember when they bought that land from the Cantor company or family or whatever that is. I mean, everyone touted that.
Positive.
That was great move. Great move.
So the question is, why would anybody have to ask what people think about it? It's kind of it's almost like, do you enjoy the the sunny outdoors if you're here?
Yeah.
If not,
Well, I think the Republican Party has gotten a bad reputation, unwarranted for things like that, being unenvironmental. I think this current administration, if you will, like you said, has been done nothing but prove otherwise. Certainly
in the state of Florida, and I think to your point, people have short memories. I don't expect anybody to have a 100-year memory or 120, but Teddy Roosevelt was the president that started the national parks, and we've got plenty of folks that have been involved at the top and local levels and in politics that care about our environment. Whether we're going to be here in 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years.
Right. I mean, I know there's been some pushback after the Clean Waterways Act from places like the Sierra Club and different things like that. And I understand not everyone's always going to be 100% completely happy. And there are certain groups in the world that say, no, all your money needs to go to the organization that we believe in. You know what I mean? I get that.
It's a tough litmus test. And we're seeing that with more and more organizations, I'll just be honest, whether it's Planned Parenthood or the NRA. You've got to be with us 100% or we're not going to support you. And to me, that's not what life's about. Life's about compromise, and life's about trying to negotiate to get to an agreement where both people can be happy. You do no harm and you serve people. But to some of those organizations, they just want to hear what they want to hear.
Right, and I think it's no secret at this point to most people that this is a conservative-minded podcast. But by no means is it a hardcore right podcast. No. If anything, I fall right down the middle on a lot of issues. But it's I think what we've been saying this whole time, it's really comes down to just like the human element of things and what's the right or the wrong thing to do. And I understand you're in politics, but you try to take politics out of it as much as you can, and you look at it from that level, then you can make positive things happen. I really do believe that.
You're spot on, and I'm going to force myself not to bring it back to COVID, but an example of people calling. My legislative aide in the office, Samantha, has been a champion of dealing with constituent issues, but I call them customer service, right? Everyone's a customer of something. And people are calling, they're having issues. If they're a realtor or an independent contractor, they're having a problem getting their unemployment. And she's taken hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of calls, and we'll follow up with them in Tallahassee. And there's no secret sauce. We've got some good relationships that maybe some of my colleagues have different ones, but because of who's in office, we do all we can to try to help our constituents. And what's funny, I was walking by her desk last week, and she was literally having this, the one side of the conversation I could hear was, oh, well, he's a Republican. Oh, I'm sorry, you don't want him to help you with your unemployment anymore. And it was back and forth of, well, you're not helping me. No, we're trying to help you. And we don't, I could give care less about what someone's political party is, because at the end of the day, we're all Floridians, we're all humans. And, if you're having a hard time paying the bills and you've got kids at home or whatever the situation is, we want to make sure that if there's a benefit that is due you from you paying unemployment insurance, that you get that benefit. But there really are some people out there that, believe it or not, we ended up forwarding one of them to our state senator, who happens to be a Democrat, because he just didn't want to have our help. And we called them, of course, right away and said, hey, you're going to get a call. We tried to help them. They don't want our help. Here's what's going on. We think we can help you if you need anything. It's just, but that politics would get so far into someone's well-being, trying to take care of things.
I could take this down the road of, look at the New York situation, you know what I mean? And what the other side of the aisle tried to do for them, and it was just completely denied. It's unfortunate, because I think a lot of tragedy could have been avoided that actually happened up there. I mean, politicize that comment all you want, but I really do firmly believe that, when you offer something to someone and they say, no, we're fine. And then, but you're not really, that because you don't want to give the benefit of the doubt to the other side of the aisle. That's the bad side of politics to me. And it's really unfortunate that happened the way it did.
I think at the federal level, we're kind of there. Literally when you see, and I don't want to get too far out of our conversation, but when you see members who are really trying to pull something together and clearly come from a background where they've had these challenges themselves, like Senator Scott from South Carolina coming up with, his bill, they won't even hear it. Right. There's a black Republican senator coming up with a criminal justice reform bill, and they won't even hear it because he's a Republican. But the argument says, wait a minute, he's actually been that guy who's been in his car and felt, that fear of someone pull him over or whatever it might be. But at the same time, he's approaching it from a standpoint of, we've got to get something done. So guess what we got done? Nothing.
Right.
Same thing as always in Washington.
Yeah, it's a shame. It's a shame. And you know what? I don't know what the answer is at this point. I have opinions, But I think right now, too many opinions. This is another reason why I didn't necessarily want to go too deep into the COVID thing, because I think there's too many opinions out there right now, and I think it's really just clouding. I don't want to become part of the problem by throwing, having
I agree with you.
having to feel the need to everyone to understand my opinion. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, let's just see how this goes. Everyone get better. Everyone wear your mask.
God willing,
get out there and everyone wear your mask when you're out in public and get better. And let's get past this thing, and hopefully the dust will settle, and then we can look back on it and be like, all right, then we could really get back to being, the America that we should be. So, all right, enough of the COVID, right? So
keep getting stuck down that hole.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Is as much as you try to avoid it, it's really hard, because we're all living it, every day, and it can become a very stressful thing for a lot of people. For everybody, really, it's a stressful thing. Some people it can get the better of, and then some people are having some, mental issues about it right now, and we definitely feel for those people, and I understand, being locked in, being closed in, being, having your freedoms limited and stuff like that. It's not good for everybody.
Right.
So hopefully we can all get through this as soon as possible. So for the betterment of that. But one thing I do want to talk about is some of the things about the American Flood Coalition that you've been spearheading. So
there's an organization called the American Flood Coalition. It was one of those nonpartisan, non-political kind of
I like that.
organizations.
Non-political. There we go.
So I guess ultimately it's policy based. So the American Flood Coalition, one of the earliest members was at the time when he was in Congress, Carlos Curbelo. Sorry. And he's still involved. He's on the board. I got involved. I may have been one of the, if not the first county commissioner at the time. This was probably three years ago. And our former Rep and Senator Ellen Bogdanoff, she is now a lobbyist, and her son Alec Bogdanoff she's involved in it. But then her son is an MIT educated PhD environmental scientist, and he's got quite a background. But he's doing the work here in Florida, and it's really it's one of those things that you get together and nobody talks about. Who caused the flooding? Do we blame the what part of man or the environment do we blame? Instead of that, we figure out how do we deal with the issue.
Right.
And it's mitigation. It's coming up with a plan. And what I've realized is that Florida, for all of her positives and benefits and the economy and natural resources, we are getting about 25% of what the state of Louisiana is getting from the federal government.
Oh, wow.
For these major water infrastructure projects, not specifically water like Watershed or Everglades, but for if we need to build, $8 billion, for example, in, immediate impacts for coastal flooding by putting up certain areas of seawall or other mitigation devices or infrastructure. But for a plan, we won't have the level of help we really need.
Gotcha.
So that's kind of part of where this is going, and then.
So Louisiana is getting all the love there, huh? For the most part.
Well, they are underwater.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, it's warranted.
And the Mississippi's having its erosion issues and all that. But we should be able to. And I'll look back when I was on the county commission, and then this first 2 years in the state house, I got to work with somebody who, quite honestly, we didn't always see eye to eye with each other. Kristen Jacobs, and she was finishing her last term or third term in the Florida House. She just passed a little bit ago from cancer, a long fought battle, but she was a defender of the environment, and I think President Obama had pointed her to a coastal coalition. Basically, she kind of spearheaded with some other counties, and I've gotten involved over the years with the South Florida Regional Climate Compact, and what that was 6 or 7 counties. It's been a while since we've had a get together or meeting on it, but it's going from the Keys up to kind of the Gold Coast and north of that, and coming up with ideas and processes that work together. So to your point of, you can get all the way down to if we have 3 houses on the water, and I raise my seawall and you're on one side of me, and somebody's grandmother's on the other, and you don't, the water's going to all come in
right
to where I am. So expand that thought with 7 counties and say, all right, well, if Miami-Dade, Miami Beach do all this infrastructure work, and Hollywood, Hallandale don't, ultimately that's going to come in. Whether it's actual sea level rise or coastal flooding issues from storms or anything else, we've got to work on this as a region, and then ultimately I think the state has to work on it together. So that plan needs to be put together, and this is kind of one of those. The reason I find it to be, I don't want to say fun, but interesting and something that has a positive energy is because it isn't political. It's just people trying to work to get to an answer, and the conversation never comes up of this is all man-made. We have to blame man, and we have to stop because then the real work stops, right? Instead of coming up with a solution and having that plan.
Blaming stops everything, right?
Yep, that's it.
Yeah.
So that's why it's been an organization.
The funding for that comes from.
So American Flood Coalition is really policy based, but it ultimately would be our states. It's state or federal.
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, in other words, they're going to help us put policy together that will allow, for example, maybe a Fort Lauderdale, Pompano Beach project or something that's going on the beach, or other infrastructure flooding. I'll give you an example, not specifically related to that, but the types of projects that are going on. If you drive down Cordova, just north of 17th Street Causeway, there's a section of Cordova that was pretty low lying. The houses on the west side of Cordova had waterfront docks on the other side of the street, so it was kind of separated. And that area would, if tide was high, or if we had a
king tide or something,
king tide, or even other times would come over the seawall and flood out Cordova. So they're putting in sheet piling now. Steel sheet piles into the ground and basically putting a concrete cap on that, kind of like a seawall, but just raising it up. Creating a man-made infrastructure that will keep that water out and give it, buy us some more time.
Has there been any data that you know of that's kind of supporting any sea rise issues recently?
As far as if it's happening?
Well, yeah, like anything new, like any new reports, maybe. I mean,
so probably the foremost experts, and this is where I said that you've got to be able to take an issue and talk to someone about it without discounting something because you have difference of political views. For example, at Broward County, Dr. Jennifer Hirado is probably one of the most informed and most studied people on this issue, and as a county commissioner and her being the director of that resiliency department, she and I had many conversations. My biggest kind of position, I would say, is it's happening. We know it's happening. The one thing where it's kind of the blame game where I would get stuck early on in this 10 years ago, for example, 10 years ago, is when someone says, well, the data shows by 2030 or 2040 or 2050, we're going to be 1.5 feet more underwater than we are now. Our water's going to have risen that much. Or they say it's going to be 6 feet higher. And you kind of, for me, the only thing I've ever debated one way or the other is, and whether we needed to factor this into the infrastructure projects, because you could have an infrastructure project that costs $100 million that would fix a specific problem in an area, for example, or it could be a magnitude of 10, because so it can be $1 billion if this other prediction is true, this other model is true. So to me, the timing and the models were the only thing I ever kind of scratch my head and say, how is that? So I think
it's tough to forecast that far out.
Yeah,
it really is. Especially with some of them might be in cycles.
Yep.
And you're reacting to a cycle.
Can't tell you what the weather's going to be tomorrow, right?
Yeah, right.
Within reason. If this happens and that happens, so they're using all the science and the data that's in front of them, and barring any changes to your point of cycles, cooling or heating. But we've specifically looked at all that data and said, well, there's not cooling happening anytime soon that we're aware of, and if these things keep happening, we're going to have a specific height that we need to address. And further to that point, I think you kind of look at it and say, well, am I going to worry about the 100-year flood which we've seen those 100. They're almost every like 3 or 4 years now.
Right.
But we've just got to take it as data and try to implement these projects. And I think between the American Flood Coalition and working with the federal government, we'll get there.
Yeah,
we'll get there. It's too important to not get this right. I mean, when someone says, there was an article just a couple of weeks ago about the viability of owning property in South Florida, or in Florida. Do we, between hurricanes and sea level rise and these changes in the climate, do we want to loan 30 years on a $10 million house on Hillsborough Beach? Of course, I guess if it's $10 million house, you may not need the loan, but I mean, just the average person, if you
Right.
need an 80-20 mortgage at 30 years, are they going to loan it? So the minute, we all think this is great because we have property that's typically in the right market, in the average market, increasing at different rates, but it's increasing in value, and you'll have a nest egg there, at least with that. If someone says tomorrow it's worthless because we won't make a loan on it, you're basically gambling by continuing to live here. So that's why I think it's incumbent upon us to fix these issues to the best we can.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think sometimes too, I mean, from that point, I think insurance companies try to take well advantage of these things a lot of times.
No doubt.
And, it just gets a little frustrating, as a Floridian to have to listen to some of that, because if you look at the 2004, 2005, when we had that bad string of hurricanes, everyone thinks, oh, it's always going to be like this from now on. It's
Right.
like, well, no, that's how it was in 2004 and 2005. It's never been like that again. Sure, we might get a bad storm every now and then, but you live in Florida, newsflash, right?
Yeah.
Because, you even look at the 30s and the 40s, we had some really bad hurricanes. This is just how, it is. And sure, the damage might be worse this year. But I think it's because there's more of an infrastructure to damage.
And to a degree, I mean, if you look at the Panhandle with Hurricane Michael, for example, we had some, we had a lot of our colleagues and friends that live up there. When you serve in Tallahassee, that's there was some pretty bad damage. I mean,
Sure was.
Tens of thousands of residences. And the one thing I started looking at it because
didn't a new budget get proposed to give further assistance for the Hurricane Michael victims, right?
Yeah, so we did quite a bit out of the federal, and then FEMA, and then also out of the state emergency management, and then the governor has also done quite a bit. Last year's affordable housing dollars, for the most part, mostly went over there. And because it needed to, but one of the things that's important, and I started going down the road of having the conversation with the building industry, because I spent almost all my professional career in construction, and you kind of look at what was the difference in Michael. There was that house on Mexico Beach that was standing.
Yep.
It was built as if it was built for the Keys or for South Florida. It was built to Cat 5 code if you were a Florida building code.
Dade County rated and all that. Yeah.
So, I mean,
There's
ultimately,
a reason they call it that, right?
Yeah. When we put these back, there's a reason they call it that. But I always argued, as somebody who grew up on the east side and has to pay a separate windstorm policy, when Wilma kindly came over and finally justified my argument and said, storms don't only happen east of 95.
Right.
We may be the first to be hit, but they come from the West Coast too. So when Wilma came over, it wiped out a lot of property in Weston and Coral Springs and other areas, and did some damage. But we have to do our best to make sure that if you're going to build a house back, if it had severe structural damage, maybe need to up the type of construction you're using.
Yeah, things have changed. Technologies have changed since those houses were originally built.
Yep.
I mean, although most of Coral Springs is built pretty solid.
Yeah.
There's a lot of trees in Coral Springs.
Yeah.
It's funny because you bring that up, because I was just talking to my wife the other day. I'm like, look around you, because we have canopy streets here.
Yeah.
And I said, look around you. Those canopy streets are just now starting to come back. And it's 2020,
From
Hurricane Wilma.
Wow.
So many of the trees were down. It looked like a rake went over Coral Springs, but now they're starting to come together again.
There was so much up in that Panhandle area, because that's where all of our timber industries and our forestry that's there for the paper industry or timber industry was just laid down. And the real unfortunate part was it was all laid down like toothpicks, and they couldn't really salvage it. They couldn't get it to use it for lumber because it wasn't fresh cut, and so it was a big mess. But
saturated and everything. Yeah, it's unfortunate. So what do you got coming up?
we're there's always a list of ideas for next year. We haven't really obviously filed anything for drafting yet, but
COVID slowed down a lot of the progress there, hasn't it? Of getting together. Or are you guys doing a lot of virtual stuff? I mean, I'm assuming.
No, we're doing a lot of Zoom meetings like everybody else. We're looking at one of the things that we took out to get this student athlete bill done was, and it's almost already there in every school, but we may end up filing something for guaranteed grant and aid. What that means, if you're the wide receiver for the Miami Hurricanes and you get hurt, there's an understanding you got signed for a 4-year scholarship, but there's also an understanding that while you're not playing, some of those benefits might be cut, and we want to make sure if you basically get hurt on the job that you still have that issue. One of the areas that's near and dear to me are both dogs and law enforcement, and there's actually had an instance of this locally here. Of a friend of my legislative aides is a Margate police officer, canine officer, and his dog had to be retired. He had some health issues, and believe it or not, even though they're counted as an employee and they're counted as an officer and they get hurt in the line of duty, those different things, when they get retired, they don't come with retirement health benefits.
So no one takes care of the dogs.
The officer, if they want to keep the dog.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's not necessarily the case everywhere, and it might be just a few places, but we do know that there are some nonprofits that basically are in his case taking care of this canine. But we're thinking about looking at something to say that, look, if you're an employee and you drive a bus, or you work for Parks and Rec, or you're a commissioner, or anybody working for a city, including that dog, you should be taken care of if those benefits cover you.
I love it.
So
that's good thinking.
Probably
right
the only
there.
other thing that's really kind of out there for us, probably the biggest thing is, and this may this kind of shows either I have experience in dealing with this from a local level, or I'm not the furthest right-wing person and that is the Competitive Workforce Act. I'm sorry, e-fairness. E-fairness is a name given to a situation that came out of the Wayfair versus South Dakota case, and what that basically said was if you don't have a brick and mortar facility in a state, that you can basically sell. So you get some things from Amazon that probably Amazon is all tax now, right? Sales tax on everything.
I think so.
Because they do.
I think some.
Because
I think
they
it
do
depends
have
on
brick
what
and
state
mortar.
it comes from.
Well, and it's also if they have if you have brick and mortar here. So there may be somebody selling sunglasses from their dorm room. We'll go back to the athlete thing, but from their apartment or their dorm in South Carolina to Florida. Now, if they don't have a brick and mortar here, they don't need to pay sales tax. Well, that's not a new tax. I need to be very clear about that, because my fiscal record has always been one way, and that's to look out for the consumer. But if you buy something in the state of Florida, you're supposed to remit the 6% sales tax to the state. And now in Broward, because it's another penny of transportation, 7%. Well, if they don't charge it to you, it doesn't mean you get away with it.
Right.
You're supposed to send it in, right? What this would do would automatically require any online transaction to charge it. It's not a tax. It's something you're responsible for. But what it would do is change drastically the state's budget. It would bring a lot more money in. We're looking at it as almost being able to remove the tax on commercial rents. For example, if your office here, you pay a tax on your commercial lease, which is really a tax on a tax.
Right. Yeah.
So that's probably the only tax in the state of Florida that we have a disadvantage by having. The other states, like, we don't have an income tax in the state of Florida, a state income tax, and other things, but we do have this awkward commercial sales lease tax that we hear, or rent tax that we hear from realtors all the time, and it's something we try to reduce. We usually take it down a couple tenths to a half a point in a good year, but this would probably offset that. So
I got to read into that a little bit more. As a business owner, I think I should be aware of what's going on with that, because I know that we have to charge the customer sales for all our bulk custom stuff, the sales tax in the state in which it gets shipped to.
Okay.
Not necessarily where it gets billed from. Like, we have a customer that we basically take their credit card, their corporate billing is from California, but we're shipping that to here because they reside here, because it's part of a larger company, So we have to have them charge the sales tax here.
Based on here, right?
Yeah, because before it was, I started getting filings from the state of California, and I'm like, wait a minute, why am I having to do a file for, an income tax file for the state of, or not an income tax, a sales tax file for the state of California.
But that's a little bit more than ours.
But then after I researched, I'm like, wait, I actually don't have to pay that because I'm delivering it here to Florida. So, there's all these weird little loopholes. But my point is it's easy for someone to jump in and start compounding on that. So I'm glad you guys are looking into that.
So looking at that with a member from the Gainesville area, who's a good friend, and and really kind of listening to kind of what's out there now and what are the critical issues, and you go up there having all these ideas, and next thing you know, you're running something that House majority wants you to do or whatever it might be. So we'll kind of keep our ears open.
All right,
definitely want to try to do something for the environment to continue doing that work.
All right, very cool. And you guys been keeping sane throughout the whole quarantine and all that?
Yeah,
Family
we're
doing okay?
like I said, we're trying to get out in the water. It doesn't seem like anybody's, it seems like the boat industry is selling. As soon as they get in the boat trader, they're gone.
Yeah,
but just trying to spend some time. We might get away down to the Keys towards the before fall, but kind of we're in the middle of the throes of a campaign, so that's what's going to start kicking up with a campaign office just opened, and my legislative aide Corey's he's left the state and he's running the campaign full time, so we'll be doing that.
All right, excellent. And of course, you have the studio's full support for your campaign, and
Appreciate
everyone
that.
Follow Chip LaMarca here. It's at Chip LaMarca, right?
At Chip LaMarca. Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I got hacked on Instagram the other day.
I know. I got a message from you. It was at Chip LaMarca _ at the end. I didn't realize it till after. I was like, wait a minute.
They were trying to sell a product. I wasn't sure what it was. Somebody asked me if that was me, but it was my face. It was my name, but with something after. But I don't spend much time on Instagram. Right. I'm an old guy. But they took it down. They took it down almost immediately. Yeah. So I think it's gone now.
All right. Good. So you're safe if you follow them on Instagram. Yeah. Just be careful the _. After the name.
Exactly.
And, so I want to thank you for coming in once again. And,
thank you.
Really, it's always a pleasure to have you. We always appreciate you keeping us informed of all the great things happening in our state and all the hard work that you guys do, and how that kind of, falls and spills over into the current administration's influence. And we're real proud of that here at the studio. And
appreciate what you do. I mean, you're a local product and doing some great things, and reminding us that I think we all get kind of caught up in our day to day, if that's sitting in an office or whatever it might be. I mean, we all need to get outside and enjoy what we've got here, and you do a good job of kind of reminding people what's under the water and above the water. So
that's it. And we're all connected by water. I mean, and that really is the truth. Like, we always end our show saying, no matter where we are, no matter what we're doing, we're always connected by water, and that's anywhere.
Yep.
And it really does all connect us, and that's the common thread. So I just want to leave it with one last note and say, we did mention earlier, try to take the politics out of things as much as we possibly can. This is probably my biggest drive home COVID comment. Drop the agendas, please. You know what I mean? Let's all get through this. And, if you don't agree with someone, then my advice to you is moisten thumb and turn page, and just, as bad as you want to comment on social media and kick back hard at people, please don't. You know what I mean? And just let them talk and fade away, and your life is going to be that much happier for it. So that's probably the only best advice I can give throughout all this, because it's stressful for everybody, no matter what side of the fence you're on. We are all in it together from that aspect. So, all right. We good, John? Anything you want to bring up for Chip here?
No, we're good. We covered everything.
All right. Your ego is not your amigo, right?
Next time I come, I want to see Mahi.
Yeah, no, we're going to bring in Mahi. Jenny will bring in Mahi for sure. Always do your best and let God do the rest. Don't ever forget that if you are in the market for a new vehicle, especially one of the beautiful Ram trucks that I own, or a Jeep, or a Chrysler, or a Dodge, go see our friends at Joey Accardi, Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, Ram. They will hook you up. Go see Dean, the salesman over there. He's a good friend of mine, and he gives great deals as long as you say my name. And Connected by Water, right? And, John just reminded me, go on to connectedbywater.com, get one of our new straw hats. We have them in stock. We have a limited supply left. We will be getting replenished here soon, hopefully, but those things sold like hotcakes over the 4th of July weekend. Yeah, it's hot out there, so Get yourself some shade. And also, I got to say one thing about the straw hats. They're super high quality. There are other people that offer hats for the same price that are not as good quality as ours. That's all I got to say about that. So, but please do support the studio and also support our friends over at Papa's Raw Bar, who remind you to eat, drink, and be local. They have a truck set up over there in Old Town, right, for Pop Amigos, the new project that they're working on. There's a build out going on, but they do have a food truck up there in the meantime. It's like this Asian, Jamaican, Cajun kind of thing going on. And if Papa's has got their finger on it, it's going to be amazing because they are an amazing crew. They care about everything that they do to the fullest extent. If you know Troy and Cassie, they run a tight operation over there, and everything is super sanitized, super clean, and the food is just off the charts phenomenal, as it always is. So no matter where we are, no matter what we're doing, we're always connected by water. Chip LaMarca, thank you very much for coming on the show today.
Makes sense.